been my pleasure to know Carl Reddel for about 25 years. He was the first U.S. Air Force officer allowed in Russia when the Iron Curtain was up. In 1975, he spent a year or so at Moscow State University learning the Russian language. When I met him, he was head of the history department at the U.S. Air Force Academy. He was Rotary's Russian expert. Early on, he spoke at this club a long time ago, at district conferences, at zone institutes, and all over the world. I had the pleasure of working with him in Russia on the Russian Health Task Force that we formed way back when Jim Lacey was our world president, and we were trying to zero in on Russia's multi-problems of epidemics of tuberculosis, HIV/AIDS, hypertension, what have you. Carl was a huge help because he was fluent in the Russian language. We've been over there many times since then, starting new Rotary clubs and one thing or another, but he has been a tremendous Rotarian over the years. Now he heads the Eisenhower Memorial Commission. He's the executive director, and he's been asked to recommend to our U.S. Congress, yes, that Congress that's been paralyzed for years, can make decisions on many things. They're not really helping him. But he's been asked to memorialize the 34th President of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower. The commission he heads has 12 members, 4 senators, 4 representatives, and 4 presidential appointees. Carl is a retired Air Force Brigadier General and organizes the work of the commission. He's a fellow Rotarian. He joined Rotary in Colorado Springs, belongs to the downtown D.C. club. He's a Russian specialist, of course, and who rediscovered Eisenhower because as a military officer, he was disappointed with the lack of national leadership at the end of the Cold War. Carl is here today to tell us about the work of his commission and to share a few thoughts about America's greatest public servant of the 20th century, General and President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Please welcome General Carl Reddel.
It's indeed a privilege not only to be here. I've become, over the years, very fond of Colorado. As a military family, we came to make Colorado home. Being born in the far eastern plains of western Nebraska, I feel like I haven't moved very much. Here I am back in Colorado. But to be here this morning, to breathe that good mountain air, to familiarize myself again with the congeniality of places further west is indeed inspiring. So I want to thank President Jim for giving me the opportunity to speak to his club, and I want to thank your Executive Director, Darlene Mass, for her care and patience in trying to arrange things at a distance. Not easy to do, even though we have the advantages of all this modern technology. Mindful of the fact that I had not many minutes in which to speak to you, and President Jim, it looks to me like maybe I've got 20 plus, and would like to leave some time for some question and answers. But as I came out here, I thought about how to say a lot in a brief period of time, and I realized that it would be helpful to leave some documents with you. So I can tell you that the brochure on your table, if you take an interest in it, was prepared by the best specialists in the world on Eisenhower, thousands of hours of effort to pick those very simple words which describe to you the achievements and contributions of the general, the president, and the world's citizen. And for you as Rotarians, I would think the world citizen would be an interesting dimension of whom we are speaking. Also in this brochure is information on how to contact us. I should be very clear about my role. My role is that of a staff officer. It is to help my 12 bosses, 4 senators, 4 members of the House, 4 presidential appointees, to make their very best decisions about this great American. There is also at your table something that I thought as I came out here, I was thinking about the fact that there are multiple constituencies that I'd call Eisenhower constituencies. Kansas, of course, likes to take pride of ownership of its favorite son, but congressmen from Texas have told me, don't forget Denison where he was born, and of course, Pennsylvania with the Eisenhower farm at Gettysburg is mindful of the president in retirement, let alone the young officer at Camp Cody in Gettysburg. But there is also very definitely a Colorado constituency. So on your table also is a single sheet of paper where I had jotted down just a few thoughts on Eisenhower and the state of Colorado. And some of the points in there may be of some interest to you. And lastly, there is at your table a postcard, which if you decide Eisenhower is worth memorializing, you might send it to your congressman or woman and take advantage of that fact. This will be a three-part presentation. First of all, I feel an obligation to you as my fellow Americans to inform you about the design of the Eisenhower Memorial. I don't know how much you know about it, and you may or may not know anything. So I'd like to begin with a few images. Before we go to the first design image, I'd like to make a few comments about what you see on the screen here. The single most iconic photograph of Eisenhower is here, Eisenhower speaking to the 101st Airborne on the eve of their invasion in Normandy. And that event was a world-changing event. And Eisenhower goes down in history as the Supreme Commander of the Allied forces in World War II. That is probably the single most recognized photograph of any in the world, and it was given to the designer of the memorial as part of the inspiration. The designer of the memorial, by federal law, Public Law 10679, was told he had to memorialize the Supreme Commander of the Allied forces in World War II and the 34th President of the United States. We provided this photograph, less well known. The original hangs in the Australian National Museum. This was by Joseph Karsh, the Canadian photographer. To me, it's a very special photograph because it speaks to Eisenhower as arguably the most international of all American presidents, a dimension of Eisenhower I'd only come to appreciate as I began work for this commission. What I'd like to do now is briefly walk you through the design of the memorial, and if we go to the next slide. This is the Capitol of the United States. This is the National Mall. The Eisenhower Memorial will be located down from the Capitol on Maryland Avenue on a 4-acre rectangle called Eisenhower Square. That square will become an urban park. It's now something of a concrete jungle, become an urban park within which sits the Eisenhower Memorial. So the Eisenhower Memorial is not on the mall, it's across the street from the National Mall. Next slide, please. The site is a very complicated architectural problem. 8 lanes of traffic on Independence Avenue, 4 lanes of traffic here, 4 lanes of traffic here. Irregular building lines bleeding away from this central square. How does one organize such a site and give it identity? The designer was told it had to be green and it had to be accessible. He gave this complex site definition by putting a large urban park in place with extensive landscaping and then putting columns with a traditional tapestry on them created out of stainless steel reflecting the landscape of the heartland. Within that park then sits the Eisenhower Memorial. If you were to go to the top of the National Air and Space Museum and look down on the site, you would see then this green urban park in the center of which is the Eisenhower Memorial. The site is surrounded by institutions related to Ike. Who creates the Department of Education? Eisenhower creates it, which is located right here. Eisenhower creates the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. So you have education here, health and human services over here. Who is it that regulates air travel in the United States? Over on this side, you have the FAA building. Who is it that takes America into space? Who creates NASA? It's Eisenhower. Here you have the National Air and Space Museum. Who is it that moves the Voice of America studios down to the end of this building in 1954? It's Eisenhower. And to have this memorial close to the Capitol, as opposed to the White House, which was the second to the last of the 26 sites that the commission looked at, is especially appropriate because of all Americans, Eisenhower had profound and extraordinary respect for the authority of people and the Congress of the United States. So here in the center of this green space is the recognition and celebration of the general, evocative of that iconic photograph, bas-reliefs in the back of the Normandy invasion, quotations from Eisenhower on that invasion. Over here, still in the process of evolution, is a design of the president and his cabinet behind him. We move to the next slide, please. This is what you have as a close-up of the general. It's significant that you don't put the general by himself. What you see here are 9-foot heroic-sized bronze statues. Many military leaders are known for their singular qualities. Eisenhower's unique approach to leadership, both in and out of uniform, was special in its approach to consensus, teamwork, and the successful inspiration of those that followed him. When he speaks to this collection of paratroopers before they are due to jump, one should remain mindful at that point he is in personal command of 3 million people. 3 million people from all those diverse nations and military units. A truly extraordinary role in history. Next, please. Here you see the current evolution of the design of the president, a man in uniform, and then 2 civilians. Eisenhower was a critical figure in the last century in the determination of the role between the military and the civilians in this great democracy. He and General Marshall set the high standards for criteria about how the military should relate to the civilians. And that set of statuary carries that dimension in part because you did not see Eisenhower in uniform as president. You didn't see Eisenhower rendering salutes as president. You didn't see Eisenhower putting on combat gear as president. He was very mindful of who he was as the civilian president of the United States and his role symbolically and actually in that regard. And at one point he said, I at this point must be the most unpopular United States Army general, because he's still with the 5-star rank, because of the anger of his fellow officers in the Army. And we won't even begin to talk about his problems with the Navy and with the Air Force because of his approach to national security. Please. So here you have this beautiful framed view of the dome of the Capitol. It is breathtaking when you're on the site. The most recent design revisions have broadened this view up Maryland Avenue to the Capitol of the United States. We've tried to capture the breathtaking dimension of that view of the dome, but it's very difficult to do. When you visit the site, even without the memorial there, just look for that dome. It's very special. Please. Can you believe that the Department of Education still lacks an engaging public entrance? The whole world comes to our shores for education. It's one of our great strategic strengths, and yet the public does not have access. When this memorial was to be done, the designer was told you have to be respectful of being in front of a cabinet-level department. And what the designer has done is created a 70-foot promenade between these columns, the tapestry, and the Department of Education to offer exhibit and access space. The Department of Education is thrilled that we've helped them solve that problem. Please. The diversity of Eisenhower's legacy is extraordinary. So we have approached it with a sense of trying to capture its major elements. And what you see here are what we call the 7 pivotal moments in his life, chronologically going to West Point, finding its way through the different points, D-Day and so forth. We are dealing with these dimensions of the memorialization and legacy in an electronic format. Eisenhower's military record was exceptional, and people tend to stovepipe that. Eisenhower as president was interesting and unique, each of them deserving of their own particular attention. But when you put the two of them together within that one citizen, that one man from Middle America, then you have something truly extraordinary. And so we are using this device to betray that magic. Here you have, if you go to our website, which is on the brochure at your table, this is what you'd bring up for the D-Day pivotal moment. And if you come to the, please, the next one. If you come to the site, you will not be punching buttons. You will not be looking at screens. You will hold up your digital device. It will read a code, and you will either hear the speech or have an elaboration. So you can visit the site electronically before you come. You can prepare your visit electronically before you come, and when you're there, you can elaborate however you wish on the site. Please. I'm going to leave this up as I continue a few comments. I'd like to make a few comments about Eisenhower himself before we turn to perhaps an opportunity for a few questions and at the grace and forgiveness of our club president. You might imagine, we've spent a lot of time thinking about who Eisenhower is. And so I'm going to jump to the core of my insights. My intelligence operation is basically to have put myself in touch with the world's leading specialists on Eisenhower. I exploit them shamelessly in the cause of learning the truth about this man. Let me share with you 2 of the leading insights that I have on Eisenhower. He was an extraordinarily complex man psychologically, far more so than I ever realized. He is not, in his essence, this avuncular, smiling, very simple character or personality. It's layer upon layer upon layer of conflicting tensions within the whole of his life. The second thing I'll share with you is I knew he was an intelligent man. I didn't know how intelligent he was and how hard he worked to mask his intelligence. I've learned, of course, that he read Clausewitz 3 times. You never hear Eisenhower say, I read Clausewitz. I can't tell you how many officers I've known that are very proud to tell you they've read Clausewitz. Just once. With that in mind, this complex, highly intelligent man then ends up being one of the great figures in the world. How does that happen? And I've decided that it in part is a function of paradox in his life, and the tensions engendered by those paradoxes, and how he wrestled with those paradoxes for the whole of the life. And what I'm saying to you here, I'm reducing from what could be hours of presentation to some simple points. Let me suggest 1 or 2 of the paradoxes. How is it that a young man not leaving Kansas before he's 20 years old. That's how old he was when he left for West Point. This isn't a wet behind-the-ear teenager such as I've come to know at the Air Force Academy. How is it that 20-year young man becomes one of the great internationalists of the world? And when I say great internationalists, I mean really understanding internationalism. I'll never forget the first Rotary president I heard say, you know, Eisenhower said that the greatest force for peace in the world after the United Nations is Rotary International. That's Eisenhower. Who is it that founds people to people? Eisenhower. Who is it that establishes sister cities? Eisenhower. I could go on with that argument in part because we've just finished an article for publication on Ike, the American internationalist. Paradox. How did that happen? You've met Rotarians. How did they become internationalists? How did this young lad from Kansas become that international figure? Secondly, let me pick another dimension of this man. This man was born on the wrong side of the tracks, no advantage of family, name, no advantage of any money. In fact, quite the contrary. As he put it, we were poor and didn't know it. How did an individual like that, from very ordinary circumstances, common education, how did he become comfortable in the halls of the world's power? Walking with a Churchill, a de Gaulle, a Bernard Montgomery, a General Patton, I could go on with the list. When he becomes President of the United States, no other leader in American history had had so many personal relationships with world leaders at the time. And Eisenhower was verifiably at the time not only the most popular man in the United States, but in the world. He was on the cover of Time magazine 18 different times. Second time he was Man of the Year was following his 11-nation visit over 19 days throughout the world. People showed up, not in the hundreds, not in the thousands, but in the millions. When he and Nehru walk up to the podium in New Delhi, they said Eisenhower was visibly shaken. There's a man who's seen a lot. Why was he shaken? As far as the eye could see? Not thousands, millions of people. There was no way they could see him, let alone hear him. And they were there for him. And there you have this great American general doing what? Talking to the disciples of Gandhi about peace. Now, if that doesn't send a chill down your spine about what this country has represented to the world, I'm not sure what will. Well, let me pick another element of paradox. This general, this man who commands 3 million people, caused immense death and destruction in his whole lifetime, was overseeing the development of unparalleled nuclear and thermonuclear power. This man who had seen the expansion of military power far beyond the bounds of anything that history had seen to that point. How does he come to entitle his memoirs Waging Peace? How does he come to be that passionate advocate as our commander-in-chief and as our president? Talk about paradox. I've given you just 3 of the paradoxes. No, Eisenhower was a modest man, but he was not a humble man. Eisenhower was one of the most self-confident people I have ever encountered in trying to study military history. The humble supreme commander of the Allied forces in World War II saved me. He knew what humility was, as he put it. No man who has benefited from the blood and the sacrifices of his comrades and friends should be anything but humble. But Eisenhower was supremely self-confident. He was a modest man. Let me leave you with just a couple references. The infrastructure of this country, not only the highway system, not only regulated air travel, not only access to the seas of the world with the creation of the St. Lawrence Seaway. Who is it that gives us civilian control of space? It isn't just a highway system, it's all of what I just told you. That was Eisenhower. Takes to his deathbed the secret of having created the reconnaissance intelligence system from space to ensure there wouldn't be another Pearl Harbor. As late as 1992, while I'm wearing a uniform, I couldn't have said National Reconnaissance Office to you. Eisenhower took that to his grave. I've talked with the chief historian of the National Reconnaissance Office. I know in detail how Eisenhower masked that and did that. So immense achievement. And the last and the personal reason why I support Eisenhower is because as an American military guy, I came slowly in these different international contexts to realize I was part of a great experiment. Every day that I get up, walk out on the stage of my life, I'm participating in an experiment. There's only one left, one great continentally based experiment in human destiny. That's in the North American continent. The one in Eurasia went terribly awry. So the one that's left in the North American continent, and every day we're part of the test of what that means. Well, one of the best pieces of evidence that I know as a model and as a method to balance security and freedom and all of these tensions I'm talking about, one of the best pieces of evidence we have that this American experiment can work is Dwight David Eisenhower. This is the farthest west we will have nationally memorialized an American president. We've crossed the Mississippi. We were as far as Springfield, Illinois with Lincoln. Now we're out in the heartland. I think Colorado has a stake in this memorial. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carl. We have time for just maybe a couple of questions, and then I would ask the rest of you to come up afterwards if you have further questions. So we have one right back here. Melissa?
Hi. Thank you so much for being here. Can you speak at all to the controversy between the family and the design and how that's being resolved, or if it's resolved?
Okay, let me make a few comments about the Eisenhower family and the design of the memorial. The Eisenhower family, when we began the memorial, consisted of John Eisenhower, the president's son, who just passed away this last year. He was buried in April the 17th at West Point. That leaves the 4 grandchildren, David Eisenhower, the grandson, and then the 3 sisters, Susan, Anne, and Mary Jean. David Eisenhower served as our commissioner for over 10 years. He served as our commissioner until December 2011. At that time, Susan and Anne, his 2 sisters, said that they took exception to the design of the memorial. One of their major exceptions, they do not like the depiction of the heartland of America on this tapestry. They believe it diminishes his greatness. I was with the designer and Susan and Anne in New York when the designer discussas this with him. As a result of their concerns, they said he was being too modest about their grandfather's achievements. He took what had been bas-relief representations of the general and the president, and he pulled them out of the bas-relief and created these heroic-sized bronze statues. So he has continued to modify the memorial in light of their criticism, but as David put it to me very directly, he said, "Carl, I will not be in public dispute with my sisters." David voted for the design that you see here. David was part of the selection process. I'll leave it up to you to judge family dynamics. I happen to be the oldest of 6 children, so I'm familiar with family dynamics.
Yes, General, you were head of the history department at the Air Force Academy. The site for the Air Force Academy was selected when Eisenhower was president. I've heard conflicting stories about whether Eisenhower had any, influenced that decision. To what extent did he influence the decision for the site of the Air Force Academy?
You know, Eisenhower, I'm grinning and I'm smiling because I've spent a good bit of time trying to sort that out a bit myself. And there was a huge competition in the United States over where that should be. And if you go to the library in Abilene, they've kept all of those, they've got all the letters that came in and trying to affect the process this way and that way. Eisenhower, at the end of World War II, while he was Chief of Staff of the Army, was brought in by the Secretary of Defense to recast the military training and education. And it was partially because they had created this new Air Force and they didn't know how they were going to provide the leaders. So they didn't know what to do. Should we take them out of West Point? Should we take them out of Annapolis? We don't think there ought to be another academy. That was their original view. And so as they were trying to work that out through time, why Eisenhower was brought into that process. So that started when he was Chief of Staff of the Army. He made recommendations about how it could be approached, most of which were accepted. Then later he becomes the president of Columbia University. While he's president of Columbia University, then he is made the vice chairman of a board to sort this out. And in that role, he's at the same time doing all sorts of other things for the president and the Secretary of Defense. So he's in that role. He becomes convinced that there should be an Air Force Academy. Eisenhower was very interesting. You presented enough data, you presented the right arguments, he would change his mind. Not easily, but you could change his mind. So he decided there should be another academy. So then very quietly, while he is President of the United States, he ensures that the process continues. I feel a little bit it was like what I'm doing today with his memorial. He quietly sees that the process continues so that it will finally get done. And it does happen then, but it happens apart from him as president. Eisenhower was a master of masking his engagement in matters like this. He would put the pieces in place, try to get the right people picked, and then stand back from the process. Or if he did anything, you'd never find the fingerprints. So when he came to the Air Force Academy to celebrate the naming of the golf course after Eisenhower, a reporter asked him that question. You know, did you have anything to do with the selection of, Colorado Springs as the site? And Eisenhower grinned and said, "Of course not, but they knew what I wanted."
Carl, before you leave, let's give him another round of applause. Brigadier General Reddel. We have just a couple of gifts for you as well. First of all, this represents our annual fundraising award dinner named after Branch Rickey, the Major League Baseball manager who signed Jackie Robinson and broke the color barrier. We thought you'd like one of those baseballs representing that. And then finally, representing Rotary's commitment to international goodwill is that, as you probably know, we are this close to ending polio, and Rotary plays a very significant role in that. In your honor, we're going to donate from our foundation enough funds to be matched by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in total to inoculate 150 children against polio. So we want to thank you very much for being here. Grant, thank you for having the General here as well. We really enjoyed your talk. I have one last question. What's the best book to read if we wanted to learn about Ike?
If you want to read the single best historical portrait, that is the general and the president, the whole package together, you'll still go back to Stephen Ambrose's book. And it's available in paper. It's still in print. It's flawed. He gets civil rights completely wrong. There's some other things that are wrong with the portrait, but it is an effective portrait where you have the general and the president. By that I mean you may not like the portrait that's got the ear wrong or the nose wrong, but it may be a very effective overall portrait. That's what Ambrose's book is. I'd recommend it if you haven't read anything else. Thank you.
Thank you.